This week we've got news out of the bourbon industry and things seem a little bleak. But is the bourbon boom really over? Stay tuned after the break and we'll talk about it. So this week, MGP or Midwestern Grain Products released their Q3 for 2024 projections, and they said in 2025 they will be both scaling back their distilling and, quote, further lowering our aging whiskey put away. So that means that they are going to be decreasing their older stock and then also decreasing their distilling. So first things first, who is MGP and why should we care? So MGP has long been a player in the bourbon game, and they are now in what used to be the Seagram's Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. And if you've had whiskey like this, or like this, or even whiskey like this, you have had MGP. So for years, MGP has been both contract distilling and sourcing fully matured product to customers who both don't want to have their own fermenters, or they just want to make a boutique craft whiskey brand with almost no effort on their own. And to say they've been prolific is an absolute understatement. I'm going to read the list of at least some of the ones that I know of, and I guarantee if you have been a whiskey enthusiast for any amount of time, you've most likely had one of these brands. So we're talking brands like Smoke Wagon, Nulu, Bardstown Bourbon Company, Blue Run, Old Carter, Smooth Ambler, Nashville Barrel Company, Penelope, Redemption, Old Soul, Doc Swinson, Pinhook, and many, many more. Wouldn't exist without the contract distilling or the sourcing from MGP. So MGP is said to, in their heyday, be able to lay down over 1 million barrels a year. That is over 4% of the total amount of distilled spirits in the US last year. So in 2022, MGP invested $12 million into both their rick houses and their distilling operations to be able to produce 75% more barrels. So now 2 years later, they're tailing that back. So is that a sign that the bourbon boom is over and that prices are hopefully going to be receding? I'm not quite sure we're there, and there's a few factors that I want to quote on why I think this might not be the end for bourbon and the bourbon boom. Let's get into it. So the first factor into why I don't think this is necessarily the end for bourbon is sourced whiskey itself. So I'm quoting Whiskey Decision. If you want to check out the link below, he does actually get into his sources and stuff. And if you want to follow him on Instagram, the link will also be there. He's got some very beautiful data graphics, and I nerd out about that stuff. And if you do too, definitely drop them a like. So in 2023, for the first time in 10 years, the amount of active distillery permits in the US actually went negative. Now, to put that into perspective, in 2012, there were 493 total active permits. That is not just whiskey, that is any active distillery. And in 2023, there were 2,200. So the total net change was 7%, which is not a lot, seeing as that's about a 400% increase. So what does that mean? That means that there's fewer companies trying to get permits. Also, it means that there are actually distilleries closing their doors. So the question is, what does that have to do with MGP? So generally, when a new distillery starts up, they want product to put out right away. Companies like MGP have that ready-made product that they are selling to allow those companies to have stocks immediately there, ready and waiting for you to purchase and bottle on your own. Sometimes those distilleries aren't even interested in producing their own, and those are what we call non-distilling producers, or NDPs. When the amount of permits were rising, MGP was doing a lot of that craft whiskey sourcing and allowing companies to have product right out of the box. I can think of quite a few around me, and I can think of quite a few that are very popular. I mean, Smoke Wagon is one of the best examples, I think. When they started, they are just a blending house that is basically making a craft product out of MGP sourced whiskey. I use that in quotations because I don't actually think that anybody who uses MGP sourced products should necessarily be considered a craft whiskey. Let's talk about that in the comments if you have strong opinions. I don't think it should be considered craft, but definitely try and change my mind. So now that those permits are on the decline, the need for MGP and the like to have those sourced stocks readily available for companies to come and buy from is also on the decline. So as that declines, the need for MGP to have those stocks on hand and distill more and even contract distill is lowering, thus causing less of a need for MGP's product and therefore kind of tanking their projections for 2025. That's part one. Part two, I think, is Bardstown Bourbon Company in and of themselves. Bardstown Bourbon Company has been around since 2016. They have a state-of-the-art facility, and they almost immediately started pumping out barrels as soon as they opened. In the early days, Bardstown did a lot of blending of sourced products, and even their Discovery series had a lot of MGP in it. But as Bardstown Bourbon Company grew and their stocks grew and their ages rose, there was not only less need for them to source whiskey, but they also began sourcing themselves. So there are a few notable brands in the last year or even couple months that have switched from MGP to Bardstown. First one being Nulu. Nulu now has a Kentucky series. James E. Pepper has switched, I think, almost entirely from MGP to Bardstown. Also, Hirsch has, in addition to Belmead and Jefferson's. Part of the reason why that's been so easy for them to do is that Bardstown runs a lot of the same mash bills that MGP does. They're 75% corn, 21% rye, 4% malted barley is one that they produce at both companies. 60% corn, 36% rye, 4% malted barley is also one that's at both. That is the one that is used for Bardstown Origin Series High Rye, the 51% corn, 45% wheat, 4% malted barley. They're doing a lot of the same things at both places, and it's making it easier to switch between companies. Now, unfortunately, it's not easy to see the ebb and flow between these two companies because Bardstown Bourbon Company is privately owned, therefore they do not need to report to their stockholders. So it's harder to see the immediate ebb and flow, but also it will be hard because about the time last year that things started slowing down for MGP, Bardstown also was releasing their Origin series. So it is kind of a balanced scale, if you will. However, I also think that's probably about the time that they started more sourcing operations because they had their stocks growing to 6-7 years old and they had that stock to sell to consumers. So that's possibly an indicator, and it might not be a major player in this equation, but I also don't think it's nothing. I think Bardstown is contributing to the downfall of MGP. And then the third and final reason, the economic downturn. I'm not going to get into politics here, but I think it's pretty safe to say that we are in a period of economic downturn. I don't know that I necessarily want to say recession, but inflation has been rising, and for the most part, people have less spendable income. And generally, one of the first things to go is hobbies and ultimately alcohol too. It's a consumable that you don't really get much out of. And I'm sure my whiskey enthusiast friends and I are just a small subset of the whiskey industry, but there has been a noticeable lack of impulse buys from us. A lot of that means that we are no longer spending money on those flyer purchases. We're not going to a liquor store and just buying something that we've never seen before. It's intentionally buying mostly allocated releases and things that we know are good from legacy distilleries. I mean, there are some craft distilleries that I know I'm still buying. I know I'm still buying some holiday stuff, some Redwood Empire, but the majority of my purchases are going to be limited editions and things from legacy distilleries that I already know are good. I'm not taking the chances on bottles that I would have in 2021, in part because I now have a 100+ bottle collection and I don't need that much new stuff, especially stuff that I'm not confident that I will like. I've seen pretty similar sentiments among those who are making content as well. I think we're focusing more on the things that are good, the yearly releases, the whiskey that's a low risk, high reward scenario. And while there are new whiskey enthusiasts joining every day, I don't think the NDPs are as popular or as attractive as they once were. I think sourced whiskey is dying, and I'm not sure I'm sad about it. So what does that mean? What is the outcome here? I do want to posit the scenario that I think MGP possibly saw this coming. In the past couple years, they've bought both Penelope and Luxro, now named Luxco, that the MGP acquisition has completed, and both were interesting purchases to say the least. Partly, I do think the acquisitions over the years of many companies have been somewhat of belt tightening and consolidation of the industry, but I also think this Penelope purchase in particular was MGP's way of figuring out how to market their own barrels for their own profit in a way that they weren't currently doing. I think MGP has done a mediocre job at best of marketing and selling their own bottles, but Penelope was killing it. They cut their teeth on being cheap and available while also producing a cult following of people who enjoyed their products even though they were I think, a little young. MGP's own Remus line has had some good whiskey, but also some failures, but they have some cult bottles like the Remus Repeal 5 that I have right here. This is a fantastic bottle, but I really don't honestly know anybody who is picking up George Remus bottles on the regular, especially not the newer Remus editions. And the Babe Ruth has been really expensive. The Gatsby edition was crazy expensive, even though I did think that was very tasty. But they're not doing a great job of selling their own bottles. Enter the Penelope acquisition, having the leadership that created Penelope into a solid brand, honestly. Whether I like their whiskey or not, I cannot deny that they are a solid brand doing a lot of sales. So I think having Penelope on board helps them to sell their own whiskey for their own profit in a way that they have not yet been able to accomplish. So I think that's signs of the times for MGP. While their sourcing market is going down, I think their in-house branding is going to be going up. I'm interested to see what they do with Luxro, since that has been historically Heaven Hill sourced. Now that it is switching to MGP sourcing, I'm interested to see how that brand changes. There was a while there where it seemed like, especially the Rebel brand, they were trying to tank that, and I'm not sure going forward what that looks like. I'm assuming everything's going to be MGP sourced, but switching from especially a Heaven Hill sourced wheated whiskey to an MGP sourced wheated whiskey is a huge taste difference. So I'm assuming they were trying to kill that brand in order to revive it as something else. That's just my 2 cents. They made a lot of really interesting decisions. Their Rebel cast strength was always great for the price. I hope that it returns to being that, but the single barrel program is dead as far as I'm concerned. In summation, I don't think this news is sign that the bourbon boom is over or even that MGP is doomed. The legacy distilleries that we know and love, and even some of the NDPs like Nulu and James E. Pepper, are not going away, but I do think the brands that are just selling a story are on the way out, and I honestly am not mad about that. Whiskey to me is as much an art form as it is a business, and I have no love lost for brands that are selling history without the hard work. And not so secretly, I'm hoping that this economy kills prices for high-end bottles from legacy distilleries that I love, because I'm sick of paying $250 for a 15-year-old product like Russell's Reserve 15. Even though I love it, I would rather get back to the days of $10 per year is the standard price for a whiskey. It would be nice to have some kind of cost standard so that we can figure out what actual whiskey value is these days, instead of what feels like overpaying for a lot of things. I'm really honestly hoping that this gets us back to good old-fashioned cost-effective whiskey, because I think I speak for all of us when I say that bourbon has gotten too damn expensive. So I would love to hear your 2 cents on this topic. Please drop that in the comments. Is the bourbon boom over? Does this MGP news mean anything? I want to hear your opinions. Please drop them below. Stay tuned for our upcoming videos. We already started our holiday series on gift giving with last week's episode of 10 can't miss bottles. If you want to check that out, it is right here. We have a glassware episode coming. Check out those videos upcoming. We will have some more live streams coming soon. I hope to have one here pretty soon before November. December gets a little dicey for me, so we're going to try and pack in some content before I go dark for maybe a couple weeks due to having a kid. So we're going to try and get as much in as we can before then. If you want to support the channel, check out our memberships. We've got some members here. You'll see them in the end credits. Thank you guys for supporting us. We also have a merch shop where you can get shirts like this one, or our limited edition Santa Glenn or Mrs. Claus Glenn shirts. The link for that is in the description. If you like this content, check out our other videos. Please like and comment on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And we hope you'll join us in drinking like a gentleman. Cheers. Brands like Smoke Wagon, Nulu, Bardstown Bourbon Company, Blue Run, Old Carter, Smooth Ambler. I'm going to do that again without the hand signals. Okay.